Welcome to SYFY Travelers Friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Lo Kus and No HV. Sit back and enjoy the story. Happy viewing. The mud on this world had a particular talent, Lucas decided, and that talent was getting everywhere a man least wanted it. It was in his boots, in his teeth, in the ragged hole just below his ribs, where a shard of enemy shrapnel had introduced itself without so much as a formal handshake. He lay staring up at a sky the color of dishwater, and he thought, with the strange clarity that comes to people who are running low on blood, that nobody had ever warned him dying would be so profoundly undignified. The trench walls rose on either side of him like the throat of some vast, disinterested animal. Somewhere above, the sky stuttered with light. Not the honest orange of fire he'd grown up imagining, but the sickly blue-green of plasma flares, the kind that drifted down slow and lazy on little gravity chutes and lit the whole battlefield in the glow of a dying aquarium. Beautiful, really. He'd have appreciated it more if one of them hadn't just detonated close enough to relocate most of his squad to a different postal code. Okay, he told the sky, because the sky was the only one left listening. Okay, that's a lot of me on the outside now. That's supposed to stay on the inside. Basic anatomy. That. His own voice sounded far away, like it was coming through a wall, like it belonged to some other Lucas who'd made better choices and wasn't currently leaking into the topsoil of a planet whose name he'd never bothered to learn. He'd been conscripted 11 weeks ago. 11 weeks. He still didn't fully understand what the war was about, something to do with a border, or a resource, or an ancient insult so old both sides had forgotten the punchline and kept fighting out of sheer stubborn momentum. He'd asked his sergeant once. His sergeant had told him to shut up and dig. Good advice in hindsight. He should have dug faster. The cold was the interesting part. He'd expected pain, and there was plenty of that, a hot, insistent throb that pulsed in time with the leaking. But underneath the pain was the cold, and the cold was patient. It started in his fingertips and worked inward, unhurried, like a landlord doing a slow walk-through of a property it fully intended to repossess. He tried to wiggle his toes and couldn't tell if he'd succeeded. He decided he'd succeeded. Optimism, his mother always said, costs nothing. Should have listened to Mum, he mumbled. She said join the medical corps, nice and safe back from the line. But no, I wanted to see the stars. He coughed, and the coughing hurt in a whole new and creative way. Well, here they are, 10 out of 10, would not bleed out under them again. The plasma flares were fading now, or maybe his eyes were. The trench was going gray at the edges, softening, the way a room does right before sleep takes you whether you've agreed to it or not. The distant crump of artillery had become a lullaby. He found he didn't mind so much. That was probably a bad sign. He was fairly sure not minding so much was medically classified as the beginning of the end. But he lacked the strength to work up a proper panic about it, and panic seemed like a lot of effort for a man with no blood to spare. Then the light changed. A shadow fell across him, not the drifting shadow of a flare, but something solid, something that knelt. He blinked up, and his dimming eyes tried to make sense of what they were seeing, and failed, and tried again. A woman. That was the first impossible thing. A woman here, in the ash and the wire, where anyone, had no business being. And she was the wrong color. Not the pale of his people or the ruddy sunburn of the ones who'd shot him, but a deep luminous crimson, the exact shade of an ember when the flame has left it but the heat has not, the color banked in the last coal of a fire you thought had gone out. And her ears rose in long, tapering points past the line of her dark hair, and some idiot corner of his brain. The corner that would apparently keep making observations right up until the lights went out. Noted that they were rather elegant, actually, in a way that raised more questions than it answered. Oh, Lucas breathed. Hello. Are you real? Or are you the blood loss? Because either way, no complaints. Great ears. Really committed to the whole. She didn't answer. Her face, close now, held an expression he was too far gone to read. Something taut and pained. Something that looked almost like grief, or fear, or the sick swallow of a person about to do a thing they know they'll regret. She glanced once over her shoulder at the fading war, then back down at him, and her jaw set. She bit into her own wrist. He watched her do it, too stunned to object, and where her teeth broke the skin, the blood welled up bright and strange, catching the last of the flare light so it seemed almost to glow from within, silver threading through the red like something poured out of the space between stars. Then she pressed the wound to his lips. Heat. That was all he understood in that first shocking instant. Not warmth, heat. A pouring, molten brightness that hit his tongue and did not stop, that raced down his throat and into his chest and outward, chasing the patient cold back out of his fingers, his toes. Everywhere it had crept. It burned. God, it burned, like swallowing a fistful of live coals, like drinking the middle of the sun, and through the burning some part of him distantly noted that he was still alive to feel it, which was more than he'd expected 30 seconds ago. That, he managed around her wrist, his voice cracking, is not normal blood, that is. The dark came up to meet him. But it was a warm dark now, a bright dark, and the very last thing he felt before it took him was the strangest thing of all. A second heartbeat, steady and unhurried and not his own, ticking somewhere just beneath his ribs, like it had always been there. Consciousness returned to Lucas the way an unwelcome relative returns from a long trip, slowly, with a great deal of groaning and bringing luggage he hadn't asked for. The first thing he understood was that he was not dead, which surprised him. The second thing he understood was that he was warm, which surprised him more. The third thing he understood was that somewhere very close, a heart was beating that was not his, and this did not surprise him at all, which was somehow the most alarming part of the whole arrangement. He opened his eyes onto a low concrete ceiling, cracked and weeping rust, lit by the amber flicker of a chemical lantern that hummed faintly as it worked. A bunker. Old, abandoned, the kind of place both armies had built and forgotten a dozen times over. He was lying on a folded tarp, his tunic peeled back, and where the shrapnel had opened him, there was now only a pale seam of new skin, pink and smooth as a scar 10 years healed. "That's not right," he said aloud, prodding it. "That is medically illegal. You can't just—" He stopped, because he'd become aware he was not alone. She sat across the small room with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up, watching him. In the lantern light, her crimson skin glowed like the inside of a kiln, and those long ears caught the shadows and threw them into strange, soft angles. She'd bound her own wrist in a strip of cloth. Her eyes, he could see them properly now, were a pale, luminous gold, and they were fixed on him with the wariness of a person watching a device that might either play music or explode. "You're the ears," Lucas said, "from the trench. You're real. Good. I'd hate to think I bonded emotionally with a hallucination. That's the kind of thing you don't recover from." She didn't reply. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Right, tough crowd. Understood." He pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing out of habit more than pain, since the pain seemed to have packed up and left. "So, let's cover the essentials. I'm Lucas. Technically still am, I suppose, unless being exploded counts as an honorable discharge. A soldier. Very bad one. 11 weeks of distinguished service, most of it spent digging holes and one memorable afternoon of screaming. And you are?" For a long moment she said nothing, and he thought perhaps she didn't speak his language at all, and he was working up a plan involving hand gestures and possibly interpretive movement when she spoke, and her voice was low and rough, like she hadn't used it in a while. "Nova." A pause. "And you should not be talking. You should be grieving." "Grieving? I'm alive. Bit early to grieve, isn't it? Usually there's a whole ceremony first. Flowers. Someone says nice lies about you." "Grieving," Nova said, and something in the flatness of the word shut him up. "Because of what I have done to you. To us both." She looked away, at the weeping wall, at anything but him. "My kind and yours do not share what I shared with you. It is forbidden. Do you understand? Not discouraged. Forbidden at the root, in the oldest law we have. And I broke it for a man whose name I did not know, in the mud, on impulse, like a child." Her hands had curled into fists. "So yes, grieve. It would be the sensible thing. Lucas absorbed this. Somewhere beneath his ribs, the second heartbeat gave a small, hard knock, and he realized, with a lurch that had nothing to do with his wound, that it had knocked in time with the tightening of her fists. He pressed a hand flat to his own chest. "That's you," he said slowly. "That heartbeat. I can feel your heartbeat. Nova. I can feel your actual heart from over there, which is, I want to be clear, a solid 4 meters away. That's not, people don't come with that feature standard." "No," she agreed quietly. "They do not." "So the blood? The blood is what we are." She finally looked back at him, and the pale gold of her eyes held something between apology and dread. "My people carry it in us from birth. It heals. It binds. It was never meant to touch human blood. The old ones warned it would take, and root and grow, and it seems the old ones, as usual, were unbearably correct." A humorless breath escaped her. "You were dying. I could not. I did not think. I only knelt, and it was done. And now here we are, and there is a piece of me living in your chest, and I do not know how to take it back." Lucas sat with that. He'd like it noted, handling the news that an enemy alien's blood had colonized his cardiovascular system with tremendous grace, all things considered. He looked down at the new skin, then up at her, then back down. "Okay," he said. "Okay. So, big picture, I've got a lot of follow-up questions, but I want to lead with the important one." He met her eyes. "The ears. Are they functional, better hearing, or just a design choice? Because I've been dying to ask since the trench, and it felt rude to open with it while you were saving my life." Nova stared at him. For one dangerous second, he thought he'd finally found the thing that would make her walk out into the artillery and leave him. Then her mouth twitched. Just barely, just at one corner, fighting itself the whole way, and she let out a short breath that was almost nearly against her own will, a laugh. "You are bleeding my ancient sacred blood," she said, "and you wish to discuss my ears." "I contain multitudes," said Lucas, and beneath his ribs, her heartbeat, he felt it plainly now, sped up, just a little, the way a heart does when it's surprised into something like warmth. She heard it too, he could tell. She pressed her bound wrist to her own chest and looked at him with new and deepening alarm, as though she'd just understood that the binding ran both ways, and that whatever she'd started in the mud was not finished with either of them yet. They stayed in the bunker through what passed for night on that world, a long bruised dusk that never quite committed to darkness. And it was during those slow hours that Lucas discovered his new condition came with features nobody had bothered to list in the brochure. It started with color. He was watching Nova pick apart a ration tin with the grim focus of someone defusing it, and he noticed that the air around her had begun to shimmer, faintly, like heat off a road. Not around all of her, just around her shoulders, her hands, a soft, ember-orange haze that pulsed when she moved. He rubbed his eyes. It didn't go away. When she reached for the tin and her fingers slipped, and the lid bit her thumb, the haze flared a sudden bruised violet, and in the very same instant Lucas felt a small sharp sting in his own thumb, though nothing had touched it. "Okay," he said carefully. "Either I'm concussed, or you're glowing, or both, and I'd genuinely like to know which before I commit to an opinion." Nova went still. She looked down at her thumb, then up at him, and the orange haze around her shifted to something cooler, warier, a pale, watchful green. "You are seeing it?" she said. It was not a question. "I'm seeing something. You've got a sort of a mood weather system going on around you. Right now you're anxious green. A minute ago you were violet, which I'm guessing was ow." He paused. "Which I also felt, by the way. The ow. In my thumb. So that's new." She set the tin down very slowly, the way you set down something you no longer trust. "It is beginning, then," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Faster than I feared. I love how everything you say is ominous. It is beginning. You couldn't just say, 'Yeah, that's normal side effect. Take 2 and call me in the morning.'
No, it's always, the old ones warned us and grieve, Lucas. He sat up straighter, hugging his knees.
So go on. What's beginning? Nova was quiet for a long moment, and the light around her dimmed to something low and old and sad, a color he didn't have a name for. When she spoke, her voice had changed, softer, weighted, the voice of a person reciting something learned in childhood. We call it the joining, the bond of blood. Long ago, before we ever crossed the dark to this world, my people did not fight their wars with weapons. She turned her wrist over, the bandaged one, and traced the cloth absently. We fought them with distance, isolation. To be exiled from the joining was the worst punishment we had, to live sealed inside your own skin, feeling no one, felt by no one. Because for us, the blood is how we are known. When two share it, the two become a thread. What one feels, the other feels. What one suffers, the other's thumb hurts, Lucas supplied. The other suffers, she said with a look. And it deepens, it grows roots. First the feeling of the body, pain, cold, the fast heart. Then the feeling of the mood, which you are seeing now, in your colors. And then, she stopped. And then it does not stop growing, Nova said simply. That is why it is forbidden between our kinds. Between two of my people, the joining is chosen, prepared for, blessed. Between an ember-born and a human, it has never. The old texts say only that it must never be done, and they do not say what happens after, because no one who did it lived to write it down. Her mouth tilted, dry and grim. Comforting scholarship, my people. Lucas turned this over. Under his ribs, he could feel her heart, slow and heavy now, matching the sadness in her colors. So let me get the timeline straight, he said. You knelt over a dying stranger, an enemy, broke the oldest law your entire civilization has, did the one thing every warning in your history specifically forbids, and you did it, on a hunch, in the mud, because you felt like it. Because you were dying, Nova said sharply, and the light around her flared hot and defensive, a sudden crimson that matched her skin. You were dying, and you were making jokes, bleeding out and cracking jokes at the sky, at me, at the ears. And I thought. She stopped herself. The flare guttered. I do not know what I thought. That is the trouble. I did not think. I only knelt. And there it was. Lucas felt it before she finished, a strange twist in the thread between them, because her colors were saying one thing and her heartbeat another. She said she regretted it. The regret was real. He could see it, a gray shot through the crimson. But underneath the regret, quieter and far more dangerous, was something that was not regret at all, something warm and terrified and stubbornly unwilling to wish it undone. He felt it in his own chest as clearly as if it were his. He decided, for once in his life, not to make a joke about it. For what it's worth, he said instead, quietly. Thanks for the kneeling. Nova looked at him, and her colors did something complicated, and neither of them got the chance to sit in the moment, because above them, muffled by concrete but unmistakable, came the crunch of boots, many of them, ordered, close. Lucas felt her heart slam once, hard, and his own answered it, and the anxious green around her whited out into pure cold fear. Patrol, Nova breathed, already moving, already pulling him up by the arm with a strength that reminded him she was very much not human. They sweep the old bunkers. We cannot be here. Right, great, wonderful timing. Lucas scrambled after her toward the black mouth of a collapsed rear tunnel, one hand pressed to his chest where both their hearts were now hammering in frantic, perfect unison. For the record, he hissed as they plunged into the dark. When you said the bond deepens, I really hoped we'd get to the part where it gives me useful powers before the part where I'm running from an army with an alien I met yesterday. Quiet, Nova whispered. Deeply unfair, Lucas whispered back. And then the boots were overhead, and they ran. The tunnel spat them out, some frantic hour later, into a stretch of country the war had chewed up and then lost interest in. a scorched plain of black glass and rusted wire where nothing moved but the wind. They walked until the boots were far behind them, and their 2 hammering hearts had slowed to something merely nervous. And then they walked some more, because stopping felt like an invitation, and by the time they finally allowed themselves a hollow beneath a toppled transport hull, Lucas had decided several things about deserting an army, chief among them that it involved far more walking than the recruitment posters had implied. "I want it noted," he said, easing down against the cold metal, "that I have now officially deserted. Both of us have. We're deserters. Which means for the first time in 11 weeks I'm technically doing exactly what I want, which is nothing, in a hole, with no one shooting at me." He considered. "It's the best day I've had since I got here." Nova settled across from him, folding down with that unhurried economy of movement he was starting to recognize, and for once her colors had cooled to a low, steady amber that he'd learned meant something close to calm. "You are a strange soldier," she said. "I'm a terrible soldier. There's a difference, and it's important to me." He dug through the ration pack she'd salvaged and produced 2 dubious foil bricks. "Dinner. I think this one's meant to be stew, and this one's meant to be a punishment. You choose." They ate, or Lucas ate, and Nova regarded her brick with the deep suspicion of a being whose people apparently had standards, and eventually nibbled a corner and pronounced it, after long consideration, an insult that has been pressed into a shape. Which made Lucas laugh, properly laugh, the first real one in weeks, and he felt the sound of it travel down the thread between them. Felt her surprise at it, the small, startled lift in her chest, the way her amber warmed a shade before she could stop it. "You feel that?" she said. It wasn't quite an accusation. "I feel everything now, apparently. It's very intrusive. You should know that when I said that terrible ration was funny, you got, briefly, pleased about it and then annoyed at yourself for being pleased, which, honestly, seems like a lot of internal traffic over a joke about stew." Nova gave him a flat look, but the amber didn't cool. "You will learn to stop announcing what you feel from me. It is considered rude among my people." "Among your people? Right. I keep forgetting you had a life. Before the mud." He tore off another bite. "Tell me something. About before. I've been dumping my whole tragic backstory on you for 2 days. The conscription, the sergeant, the holes. And all I know about you is that you glow. You're technically my mortal enemy, and you have opinions about stew. And so, in the sheltered dark," she told him. Haltingly at first, then more easily, she told him that she had never been meant for the front at all, that she was a healer, that her hands had been trained to close wounds and not to open them, that she'd been sent to the line only because the war had grown hungry enough to swallow even the healers. She told him about the star lore of her people, how the Emberborn read the sky the way his people read maps, how each of them was born under a particular star, whose light was said to live in the color of their blood. She told him that her own star was a dying one, far off and very old, and that this was considered either very unlucky or very holy, depending on which elder you asked. "A dying star," Lucas said. "So your whole vibe was pre-installed. That explains a lot. You're very beautiful but doomed. And you are very talks until something stops him," Nova returned. But there was no heat in it, and her colors had gone to a soft rose that she seemed entirely unaware of, and Lucas had the good sense, for the second time in as many chapters, not to mention it. They slept in shifts, and it was during his shift, watching her rest, that Lucas noticed the change. Nova slept the way soldiers sleep, lightly, but she was dreaming. He could feel it, the flicker of it through the thread, images that were not his own drifting at the edge of his mind. A red sky, a hall of crimson people, a grief he had no memory of earning. He watched her dream, and it should have frightened him, this stranger's whole life bleeding into his head, and instead he found he didn't want it to stop. Then he caught his reflection in a curl of polished hull metal, and he did briefly frighten himself. "Nova." He shook her gently. She was awake instantly, hand rising, colors snapping to alert white. No, we're fine, no boots, it's just..." He pointed at his own face in the metal. "Look." Look at my eyes." She looked. In the dim, salvaged light, his eyes, ordinary, forgettable, brown as boot leather his whole life, had begun to catch the glow. An ember glimmer sunk deep in the iris, the faintest banked coal of her own crimson taking root in him. Not painful, not even unpleasant. Just there, undeniable, the bond writing itself into his body one small, impossible line at a time. Nova stared at his eyes for a long, long moment, and the thread between them went very quiet, and her colors dimmed to that nameless old sad shade he'd seen once before. "It is deeper than I thought," she said softly. "It is not only feeling now. It is you. It is changing what you are." "Well," said Lucas, examining the ember in his eye with what he felt was admirable calm for a man watching himself become partly someone else. "On the bright side, they're a real improvement. Very striking. I could never pull off mysterious before." He glanced at her. "Are you scared?" "Yes," Nova admitted. "Yeah," said Lucas, and reached over, and, after a moment's hesitation that traveled clearly down the thread between them, she let him take her hand. "Me too. But I've decided I'm going to be scared with company. It's a personal policy. Started tonight. They might have gone on like that for a while. Two deserters, one hole at a time, holding hands at the end of the world, if the world had been inclined to let them. It was not." Lucas learned this the following day, when they crept to the lip of a ridge to scout the land ahead and found, spread across the valley below, not the war they'd fled, but something worse. Order. Neat rows of vehicles. Antennae. The clean, bright geometry of a command post, flying the colors of his own army on one flank and, impossibly, the crimson banners of Nova's people on the other, side by side, as though the two enemies who'd spent his whole conscription killing each other had simply decided, in this one valley, to stop. "That's not right," Lucas whispered. Those are both sides, together. That doesn't happen. We shoot each other. That's the entire premise. That's the war." Beside him, Nova had gone very still, and her colors had drained to a cold, flat gray he'd never seen before. "No," she said slowly. "It does not happen. Which means it is not the war." She was quiet a moment. "It is something the war is for." They watched. And the longer they watched, the worse the shape of it became, because the command post was not idle. It was searching. Patrols fanned out from it in careful grids, sweeping the old bunkers, the tunnels, the very ground they'd run through the night before. Drones drifted overhead in slow, patient loops, their sensor arrays glinting, and every so often one would pause and hang and scan as though hunting for a particular signature, a particular warmth, a particular pair of hearts beating in unison where there should only be one. "Nova," Lucas said with the sinking calm of a man watching a puzzle solve itself. "Tell me I'm being paranoid. Tell me those very organized people down there with the very expensive drones are looking for someone else. Anyone else." Nova didn't tell him that. Her jaw had set into the hard line he'd learned to dread. "The joining," she said. "A living bond between our kinds. It has never been done. The old ones forbade it, and everyone believed it forbidden because it was holy, or dangerous, or both." Her voice dropped. "But someone did not forbid it. Someone wanted it. Look down there, Lucas. Both armies. One post. They are not fighting. They are cooperating. And they are sweeping this ground for a signature no natural thing could make." The pieces came together in Lucas's head with a click he felt physically, all the way down the thread. "The war," he said. "The whole 11 weeks of digging holes. All of it. You're saying it wasn't about a border, or a resource, or some ancient insult." He stared down at the neat crimson and gray banners. "You're saying they made the two of us grind against each other for years, threw your healers and my conscripts into the same mud, on purpose, hoping that eventually one of your kind would kneel over one of mine and do exactly what you did." "A bridge," Nova said quietly. "A living bridge between the species. Whoever holds it holds a thing that has never existed. A weapon, if they are cruel. A key, if they are clever. A cure, if they are kind." Her gray colors flickered. No one down there looks kind. Lucas exhaled slowly. So, just to summarize where we are. I got conscripted into a fake war, got exploded, got saved by the one thing the fake war was secretly designed to produce, and now the two armies who spent years pretending to hate each other have teamed up, drones and all, to come collect me and my alien for study. He nodded to himself. That's, I keep thinking I've found the bottom of how bad this can get, and then the war goes, no, keep digging, which frankly is on brand. It's all I did for 11 weeks. Nova's mouth twitched despite everything, a ghost of amber warming the gray, and Lucas felt the small flicker of it and clung to it, because it was a great deal better than the fear underneath. We move at dark, she said, along the ridge, away from the valley. The drones read heat. If we stay low, in the glass fields, the ground holds the day's warmth and confuses them. It is not much. It is what there is. They waited out the daylight pressed into a fissure in the rock, and it was there, in the long, tense quiet, that the thing they'd both been not saying pressed closest to the surface. Nova's colors kept drifting when she thought he wasn't watching, to that soft, betraying rose, and each time she caught it, she smothered it back to gray. And each time Lucas felt the whole small war of it play out in his own chest and said nothing, because some things a man should let a woman lose in private. You could give me up, he offered at last, gently. Down there. Walk in, hand them the human, tell them it was a mistake. They might forgive you, unforbid you, whatever your people do. Nova looked at him with something close to insult. After all the trouble of saving you, she said, I am not going to hand you to a drone. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, and I want you to know the bar was already low. Dark came. They went over the ridge and down into the glass fields, low and quiet, two hearts hammering as one, and for a long while the ground's stored warmth hid them just as she'd promised, and Lucas began, foolishly, to hope. Then the wind shifted. A drone that had drifted past them turned, hung, scanned, and locked, its sensor light snapping from idle blue to a hard hunting red, and a klaxon began to wail down in the valley, thin and rising. Ah, said Lucas. There it is. The bottom. Found it. They ran, but the glass field offered nowhere to run to, and figures were already moving to cut them off, gray and crimson together, a dozen shapes closing in a net that had clearly been practiced. Nova grabbed his hand, her colors blazing white, and Lucas felt her fear and his own become a single unbearable brightness in his chest. And then the net drew shut, and rough hands were on them, tearing them apart, and the last thing he felt before they were dragged in separate directions was her heartbeat, panicked, furious, refusing to fade even as the distance grew. They put Lucas in a cell of humming white, clean, cold, lit from every surface so there were no shadows and no corners and nowhere for a mind to rest. And they took Nova somewhere he could not see, but he could feel where she was. That was the thing they hadn't accounted for, the thing that no amount of clean white light could sever. Somewhere off to his left and below, 2 walls and a floor away, her heart was beating, quick and furious, and as long as it beat he was not, in any way that mattered, alone. Right, he told the empty white room, because talking to nothing had gotten him this far. Let's take inventory. I'm a prisoner of 2 armies at once, which is honestly efficient. I'm hated bipartisanly. My alien is somewhere in this building being poked, and I can feel her being annoyed about it, which is at least good company. He pressed his back to the cold wall. Nova, if you can, I don't know how this works, but if you can feel me being calm right now, know that I am absolutely, completely faking it. He didn't expect an answer. He got one anyway, not in words, nothing so simple, but a pulse down the thread, a deliberate one. Her heartbeat, which had been racing, slowing on purpose. 1 beat, 2. Slow and even and pointed, and he understood it the way you understand a hand squeezed in the dark. She'd felt him. She was answering. I am here. Breathe. So he breathed. And as he breathed, and their 2 hearts found each other's rhythm across the walls between them, something remarkable happened. The colors came back. Not around her. He couldn't see her, but in his mind, faint and flickering, an impression of her that traveled down the blood they shared. Frustrated red. A spike of pain, quickly smothered, that made him flinch and press his hand to a shoulder that wasn't the one that hurt. And underneath it all, threaded through the fear, a hard, cold, determined gray that he recognized, because he'd been feeling it grow in her for days. She was not despairing. She was planning. Good, he thought, as loudly as he could, feeling ridiculous, hoping the thread carried tone, and not just feeling. Because my plan is, sit here and be charming until they get bored. And I'll admit, it has flaws. He felt her exasperation come back so sharply it was almost funny. And it was funny, and he laughed alone in the white room. And 2 walls away he felt her heart do the small, startled lift he'd come to love, the one that meant he'd surprised her into something warmer than fear. The interrogations, when they came, were their own kind of theater. They asked him what he was. They asked him what she'd done to him. A man in a clean gray uniform showed him charts of his own blood, riotous with silver threads that had no business being in a human, and asked him how it felt to be the first successful bridge, and Lucas, feeling Nova's steadying pulse the whole while, smiled and asked whether the bridge came with a pension, because 11 weeks of service and no one had mentioned dental. They did not find him helpful. He counted this a personal triumph. And all the while, beneath the banter, the plan was building, hers, carried to him in pulses, and his carried back the same way. A whole conversation happening under their skins that no interrogator could overhear, because it made no sound and left no mark. She would move at the shift change. He felt her count it out in the rhythm of her heart, felt the moment she chose, felt it approach like a held breath. His part was small. His part was to be exactly what they already thought he was, the mouthy human who wouldn't shut up, loudly enough to pull eyes his way when the moment came. It came. He felt Nova's heart slam once, the signal, and Lucas stood up in his humming white cell and began, at the top of his lungs, to sing, badly, tunelessly, a marching song his terrible sergeant had drilled into him. And it worked as well as anything so stupid could, because guards came and doors opened and eyes turned. And in that turning, he felt Nova move. He felt everything, the surge of her, the crimson blaze of her colors going to war, a corridor, a guard, a door that should have been locked, and wasn't because she'd spent 2 days of captivity learning precisely which one. He felt her fear and her fury and her hope all at once, and he wrote it, and he kept singing. Then he felt the pain. It came out of nowhere, white and total, a shock through his side so vicious it dropped him to his knees mid-verse, and it was not his pain. It was hers. Somewhere in that corridor something had gone wrong. Someone had struck her, or worse, and the wound of it tore through the thread and into him as though it were his own body opening. He gasped, folded around it, and felt with sudden sick clarity how far the bond had grown, that a blow to her nearly stopped his heart, that if she died in that corridor, he would very likely die on this cold white floor, and that he found he did not even mind the danger of that, only the danger to her. "No!" he ground out, hauling himself up on the wall, pressing every scrap of himself down the thread toward her. "Get up, Nova. Get up. I felt that. I know it's bad. Get up. I did not survive being exploded to lose you to a hallway." He poured it into her. Warmth, stubbornness, the sheer bloody-minded refusal that was the only thing he'd ever been good at. Up, please. Up. And her heart, which had stuttered, caught, steadied, climbed. He felt her drag herself upright through a haze of pain that was now his pain too, felt her push on, and then, bright and clean and impossibly close, he felt the outside. Cold night air, open sky. She had reached a door and it had opened, and beyond it was the dark. They came for him then, the guards, alarmed by the noise she was making elsewhere, and in the chaos of it, he simply walked out behind them through the door they forgot to close, following her heartbeat like a lantern, until at last he stumbled out into the same cold night and saw her, bleeding, swaying, gold eyes blazing. More beautiful than anything had a right to be while leaking that much, and neither of them said a word. because they didn't need to. They just ran, together, into the dark that had finally, mercifully, run out of bottom. They ran, until running became walking and walking became leaning. And somewhere in the black hours before dawn, they stopped in the shelter of a dead ridge, and Lucas did the only field medicine he knew, which was to press his hands to the wound in her side and hold on. He felt it heal, felt her own blood knitting her back together, that same silver-threaded impossibility that had saved him in the mud, and he felt, too, the cost of it, the deep tiredness it pulled up out of her, and without thinking he did the thing that felt natural now. He pushed his own strength down the thread toward her, the way she'd pushed hers into him. Her breathing eased. Her colors, which had gone the dangerous gray of a guttering coal, warmed back toward amber. "You are not supposed to be able to do that," she murmured against his shoulder. "Give it back. The strength. That is not—" The joining was never meant to run both ways so soon. "Yeah, well," Lucas kept his hands where they were. "I've made a career of not doing what I'm supposed to. Digging when I should have been running. Running when I should have been dead. I'm consistent, if nothing else." By the time the sun came up, a real one for once, thin and gold and honest, no plasma flares in sight, they had found a rise that looked back over the whole ruined front, and there they stopped, because there was, quite suddenly, nowhere left to run to that mattered, and both of them knew it. Behind them, the two armies had already broken their strange alliance and returned to hating each other, because a bridge that would not be caught was no use to anyone, and it is difficult to keep enemies cooperating once the thing they were cooperating to steal has walked out a door someone forgot to close. They were hunted by both sides now and beloved of neither, which Lucas pointed out was at least a kind of unity, and he'd take credit for it. "So this is us," he said, sitting on the cold grass with the whole ash-gray world spread out below. "The great secret weapon, the living bridge. Two deserters and one very tired heartbeat between them, sitting on a hill." He glanced at her. "I have to say, for something both armies burned years and a fake war to create, we're a bit of a disappointment. We can't even fly. I checked. I jumped off a tunnel ledge on day 2 hoping the blood would kick in. It did not. I have notes for your old ones." Nova laughed, really laughed at last, the reluctance finally worn all the way through, and the sound of it came down the thread and lit him up from the inside, warm as her blood had been that first night. "You are the worst weapon in the history of either of our peoples," she said. "Thank you. I've worked very hard to be useless. It's the only thing that kept me alive." She was quiet a moment, watching the honest sun climb, and when she spoke again, the humor had gently gone out of her, replaced by something braver. "They wanted a weapon," she said. "A key. A thing to be owned. That is what they made the war for. To force a bridge between our kinds and then hold its leash." She turned to look at him, gold eyes steady, the ember of them matching the new ember in his own. "But that is not what we are. A weapon is a thing that is used. We are not being used. We chose. In the mud, I chose. On the hill, you chose. That is the one thing they cannot manufacture, and it is the one thing that makes the bridge worth anything at all." Her mouth curved. "We are not their weapon, Lucas. We are their mistake. We are proof their two peoples can be one blood, one heart. And that terrifies them more than any bomb because you cannot fight a war against people who have decided to be each other." Lucas considered this. He thought about the man he'd been 11 weeks ago, digging holes he didn't understand for reasons no one would explain, small and afraid and alone inside his own skin. He thought about the cold that had almost won in the trench, patient and certain, walking through him like a landlord come to repossess. And he thought about the thing that had knelt over him in that cold and pressed her burning wrist to his lips, and without meaning to, without a single thought, dragged him back into a life that now contained a second heartbeat and a woman with unreasonable ears and a future no map had a name for. "You know what the strangest part is," he said. "I keep waiting to want it undone. The blood, the bond, all of it. Everyone kept telling me to grieve. You did. The old ones did. The whole doomed weight of your ancient sacred whatever. And I keep checking, honestly checking. And I don't. I can't find the regret. I've looked. It's not in there. He tapped his chest, where her heart beat steady alongside his own. There's just you. Nova's colors did something then that he had never seen. Not rose, not amber, but a bright, clear gold, open and unhidden. The color of a person who has stopped fighting what they feel. And she let him see it. On purpose. For the first time. For an Emberborn to love a human is forbidden, she said softly. Good thing you're a mistake then. A weapon. A deserter. Whatever we're calling it this hour. A bridge, Nova said. They sat together as the sun cleared the ridge and turned the ash to something almost like gold. Two people the world had built to be enemies and accidentally made into one thing instead. And when at last they rose and turned their backs on both armies and walked down the far side of the hill into a horizon that belonged to neither of them, Lucas found he was no longer afraid of the distance, or the future, or the strange new ember burning quietly in his own eyes. He had walked into that war alone and inside his own skin, and he was walking out of it with a heartbeat that was not his own, keeping time with his, as clear and constant as his own pulse. And for the cold that had almost won him, and the woman who had knelt in it and refused to let it, he found that he was, against every warning ever given him, simply and completely grateful. And so they walked into a horizon that had no name, two hearts beating as one, where once there had been only cold. Lucas had gone into that war a stranger to himself, small, afraid, sealed inside his own skin. And he came out of it carrying someone else's heartbeat like a lantern in the dark. Not because a weapon was forced into him, because a hand reached down into the cold and refused to let him go. Maybe that is the strange truth the story leaves behind. We spend so much of our lives being told who our enemies are, which people, which kinds, which colors we are meant to fear. We inherit wars we never started, and dig holes we never chose, for reasons no one ever quite explains. And yet sometimes the very thing we were taught to hate is the thing that kneels in the mud and gives us its blood, its warmth, its heartbeat, and asks nothing but that we choose it back. So let me leave you with a question to carry out of here and into your own life. Who has knelt in the cold for you? And did you let yourself feel their heartbeat? And is there someone, right now, on the other side of some border you never chose, who might simply be waiting for you to decide to be their blood instead of their enemy? Sit with that one. It has a way of following you home. The end. We've reached the end of the story, friends. Don't forget to hit the like button. Leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next episode.